you don't have to put everything into one design. You're just trying to pique someone's interest, or there's one special point in the design that's like, oh, I really love the way it does that. Hi, I'm Jarrod Lim, and basically I do product design, furniture design, some interior design, pretty much any type of design that people ask me to do.
And you have a large body of work, but before we deep dive into specific projects, can you talk about your design and prototyping process? What are the tools you prefer working with, and how do you work?
I mean, it depends on the project that I'm working on. So like sometimes if I'm doing something, quite simple, maybe a small product that I've sort of done before, I mean, it can be quite a straightforward process from, sketching, make a model, go onto the computer, and then it's quite easy to produce the final product. But I guess if we're experimenting and trying something new, which most of the time I am, there's sort of a back and forth. So sketching, maybe make cardboard models, and then test materials or test processes and see if what I want is actually achievable. And then, maybe CAD drawing, and then send it to the factory and see if they can build sort of a working prototype and see how it goes. So sometimes, I mean, it can be for a simple product, it could be a couple of days. If I already have a good idea of what I want the product to look like or do, but sometimes, I mean, it can drag on if I'm not happy with how it's going, or I just don't like the design, or it's just I'm not satisfied with it. Then I'll redo it until I'm happy. Yeah.
And you've been a designer for many years. What are the design rules that guide you? Do you have like a design mantra or philosophy?
When I started, I guess I would say I was more flamboyant, I guess you'd say, trying shapes that are, kind of wild and wanting to get more exposure, of course. Then as sort of my career's progressed, looking for more subtlety in my designs, and also after I worked in Italy for a while, and then trying to kind of realizing that you don't have to put everything into one design. You're just trying to pique someone's interest, or there's one special point in the design that's like, oh, I really love the way it does that, and sort of that's enough. You don't have to then add something more on top of that.
Can you talk about the most challenging product that you've worked on personally?
Some of the products I did for Royal Selangor, they actually look quite simple, sort of these faceted shapes. But to do it in their material is actually extremely difficult. And to get it looking flat and to get it looking the way we wanted was much more difficult than, if I had have done a very intricate shape. So sometimes, yeah, vice versa, a product that looks very intricate and detailed is not as difficult to make because you can kind of hide the difficult parts, I guess, yeah.
Okay, can you tell me a bit more about your award-winning product, the Streamline Chair?
Okay.
Right? How did it come about, and what was the design process?
Okay, yeah, the Streamline Chair I did way back in 2006. I was actually teaching at the time. I wasn't sort of a full-time designer, and I had this idea for a chair that was, based around sort of the lines of what you see in like wind tunnel type of photos, and I wanted this chair to look kind of fast, and so I had this idea that the chair should look like the air is flowing over it. But as I was slowly sort of designing it, I was sketching it a lot, and then I made cardboard prototypes and slowly figured out the details, I guess. And while I was doing that is when sort of this process of adjusting the small details, the thickness of the wood or the gaps between the wood, to try and figure out the shape I wanted versus the possibilities of how it could be manufactured.
Can you talk more about the collar magazine rack as well?
The collar magazine rack was an experimental project where I had been partnered up with a fashion designer actually. We kind of had a similar idea of focusing on these smaller details of the design, and then that's it, that's enough of the design. So he was working on shirts with special collars or special cuffs, but really it looked like quite a simple shirt, but it was quite intricate around the collar. And so I kind of had this idea, it's like, oh, I can make a similar collar that became this magazine rack shape. And then I added my own sort of spin on it, that it had a kind of like a secret function.
So that rack was made out of aluminum, but generally I see a lot of wood in your designs. Can you tell me, do you have a special affinity for this material?
Originally, when I came to Singapore and set up here, I wasn't particularly interested or specifically aiming to design in wood. It just so happened that I was introduced to a factory that makes wood furniture, and then from there I presented the Apex collection, and that was only my second exhibition in Singapore. And at the time I showed it, and a lot of other factories and brands and manufacturers were walking around the show, and they came up to me and said, oh, you designed something out of wood, it looks fantastic, maybe you can come and design something for us. And that's how I ended up meeting more companies that produce furniture in wood, and more and more and more, and it just grew from there.
And the tree ring birdhouse looks so interesting. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, that actually was made from offcuts. So we had a lot of offcuts lying around. I mean, they're quite thin, sort of 10 millimeters. And so I just kind of had this idea of, I wanted to do a small promotional product, but just stick together all the offcuts in some way. So I was sort of just fiddling with birdhouses, and then I came out like, oh, the bird, where would the bird feel most comfortable? Back in the egg, maybe. So it ended up sort of, I'll just work on this kind of egg shape, and the bird can go back and live inside this nice little egg. And we get to use up all the offcuts from the factory and just stick them together. And it worked out quite nice.
And tell us more about the chair you're sitting on.
Yeah, so I was looking at these gates, and I thought, that'd make a really nice sort of chair. How can I use it in some way? So I actually sought out a wrought iron manufacturer in Singapore, one of the last gate custom makers in Singapore, and asked him, could you make this chair for me? So they built this one prototype, which was really nice. And so the design came from, it's actually a gate on Joo-Chiat Road. I don't know if it's still there anymore. So I saw the fish scale pattern, and I thought, oh, that's fantastic. How can I use that? And then the idea was that the chair can be more like your own miniature secluded space. So using this idea of like a gate surrounding that makes you feel safe and confined. Yeah.
So you studied industrial design in Australia, and then you went to work for one of the most famous industrial designers and architects in the world. Tell us more about that experience, and how has that shaped you as a designer?
So after I met her in Melbourne, and I first, jokingly kind of said, I'd like to come and work for you. I just graduated from my first degree, I think, and I just went up to her after she'd given a talk in Melbourne, and she said, oh, of course, come and work for us. So this is Patricia Urquiola, and just at that time, this was about 2002 or 2003, she was just starting to sort of take off. And so I happened to go over there a year later, and I kind of emailed her, and I turned up at her studio and said, remember me? can I come and work for you? And she said, okay, sure. And so I ended up doing an internship for around 6 months. And then after that became a full-time staff member. But yeah, that was a fantastic learning experience there, because I think when I finished university, you're always unsure if what you've studied is applicable in the real world. And going to her studio, it was only a really small studio, so there were only, I think there were 6 product designers and 3 or so architects. And so we were hands-on with every project. And then you realize that what you learned at university is exactly what we were doing in her studio. So I would we'd be sketching, we'd be showing it to Patricia. Then she'd say, oh yeah, I quite like this one, let's move ahead with this, let's make a model. So we'd be making lots of cardboard models over and over and over again. And then full-size cardboard models and wire bending and all sorts of things, all in our little studio. Then also, I mean, it was really fortunate that because the studio was so small, we'd actually, personally go out to these famous companies, B&B Italia, Alessi, Moroso, all of them, and physically show them the model, and we'd sit around discussing, and they'd say, oh, we can bend it like this, or we can bend it like this. So it was really like hands-on and exactly the way you kind of hoped industrial design would be. Less about sitting on CAD and drafting. And then sort of the CAD drawing came afterwards, after you'd really done the fun part, the design work and the discussing, and this is how I want it made, and selecting fabrics and things like that. Yeah.
Can you talk about some other designers who have influenced you? Who are designers that you look up to or admire?
Yeah, I mean, Patricia, of course, was one. I mean, she taught me, not directly, but always she was looking for one strong idea in each design. And so that is something that I sort of took on board, is not to do too much with every design. Like a table doesn't have to be a crazy shape and a crazy material and a crazy method of sitting at the table. It can just be one small idea that you see that and go, oh, that's fantastic. I love just the edge of the table. It's so perfect. Another one was Naoto Fukasawa, who came to Singapore quite a bit, sort of mid 2010-ish. So I was working on some workshops with him, and of course he's very strict with the details of the design. So I definitely learned, again, that idea of just one special detail on the product which makes you go, it's just perfect. And then everything else is sort of supporting that idea of that special piece of the design. So I think that was more not like a whole new way of thinking, but just like reinforcing this subtlety of design, which is something that's kind of, as you progress through your career, is you try and improve, and it's not something you kind of start out with. It's something that you build upon and you learn as you go along.
I understand you also have your own line of products that you launched some time back.
Yep.
Could you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, so previously I designed, this was about 7 years ago, I designed like small objects for the home, some rocking horses and candle holders and things like that. And I was sort of selling them to various shops in Singapore, Tangs, Takashimaya, even Metro, and they were selling quite well. And that was my own foray into creating a brand and selling products. And so then I discovered that it's not as straightforward as it seems. You go from designing a product to manufacturing a product, but then you become a wholesaler, a distributor, a retailer, a warranty person, taking back things that are damaged, or a delivery driver delivering to people's houses. So I was doing everything. So it was interesting, but yeah, it's a whole different career, I guess. Yeah.
Now, as a designer, how important is it to push the envelope? Do you think it's necessary? Do you think it's sometimes it gets in the way of good design? What's your take?
Yeah, I think it depends on the project. So I mean, for some of the furniture brands I'm working for, sometimes they want a wow product, which they want to promote. Sometimes they want sort of more a subtle product that pairs with something else, that fits with their existing range. So it's not always you have to do the most, you know, experimental design all the time. And I think maybe different designers, you know, focus on those areas more. You know, whereas some, of course, focus on more subtle stuff. But yeah, so sort of maybe some, yeah, it depends on the client, whether I'm pushing, whether they want to try something new or whether they're looking for something that already matches with what they've got.